My name is Stuart Schlossman. I'm president and founder of MS Views and News. I too have multiple sclerosis. This program is about understanding disability progression in multiple sclerosis. I want to get everybody to thank our sponsor of this series is Sanofi. All right, so I want you to all give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Professor Rob Motl has systematically developed a research agenda that focuses on physical activity and its measurement, predictors, consequences, and interventions in persons with neurologic diseases, particularly multiple sclerosis. Professor Motl has generated a body of research on the validity of common physical activity measures in persons with MS. There's a whole lot more to say about him, but I don't have the time, so let's welcome up Professor Motl.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and to talk a little bit about exercise training in people with multiple sclerosis across the disability spectrum. So I want this talk to really be about the utilization of exercise for all people living with MS, no matter how much multiple sclerosis has affected you. And so just as far as disclosures are concerned, those are my sources of funding for my research. This is what I plan on talking about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about definition of terms and provide a lot of illustrations to make sure you understand when I'm talking about exercise, what I mean about exercise for the entire spectrum of people living with multiple sclerosis. After doing that, I want to help you understand what the benefits of exercise training are. So if you're willing to engage in this behavior, what can you expect to accomplish and benefit? Talk about the safety, because there's a lot of concern about whether or not exercise is safe for people with multiple sclerosis. And lastly, talk with you about a prescription. What exactly do you need to do as a minimum dose of exercise to make sure that the benefits are accrued? So definition of terms. I want to make sure we're all operating on the same page. So when I talk about disability, and I know Dr. MIRAVALLE is going to talk much more about disability, and he'll do a much better job of talking about disability as a neurologist. Remember, I'm just a researcher. So when I talk about disability, I'm talking about the expanded disability status scale that was developed by this gentleman, John Kurtzky. And this is a scale that's based on a neurological examination. So you meet with your neurologist and they run you through a series of tests and examinations, and they score that examination based on this thing called the EDSS. The scale is divided into 20 levels, with each level representing a different degree of disability. And this is based on 8 different systems that the neurologist is assessing. Some of these systems are pyramidal. They have to do with moving your extremities. Some are cerebellar, having to do with your balance and your ability to stand upright and maintain your posture. Some have to do with sensory, the way you feel things and things along those lines. And they evaluate all these systems and come up with an overall score. And the overall score is depicted here. It goes from 0, where you have essentially a normal neurological exam, all the way up to, hopefully a neurologist isn't doing an exam on a person who's no longer alive, but 10, which is death due to MS. And you can see that as you move across this scale, it moves from normal to very minimal symptoms to minimal disability to moderate disability to more impaired. And what this is reflecting is varying degrees of mobility or decline in mobility. Someone who has little neurological disability, someone who's starting to have moderate disability and is starting to have some limitations in their ability to walk and move around on a daily basis, to individuals who are starting to use assistive devices to ambulate, such as a cane or walking poles or a walker, to individuals who are later on in the spectrum who use a wheelchair. And I want you to kind of look at this for a moment and think about, can someone across all stages of disability with MS engage in exercise training? And I hope by the time I'm done today, you understand the answer to that is yes, absolutely. So from that, I want to make sure that we're all understanding what I mean when I say exercise training. Exercise training is planned, structured, and repeated bouts of physical activity. So it's planned. You have forethought that you're going to go engage in exercise. It's structured. It has some sort of parameters around it that dictate what you're going to do on that day. And it's repeated. You do it again and again and again over time so that you can start to achieve benefits for improving or maintaining health-related fitness. When we talk about exercise, we talk about it based on frequency, the number of days a week you do it, or the number of times per day that you do it, okay? Some people need to do smaller bouts of exercise, but they do multiple bouts of exercise in a single day, or it could be doing exercise 2, 3, 4 days per week. The intensity, or how hard the exercise is. The intensity doesn't necessarily have to be vigorous. It can be fairly light movements to reap benefits. The timing, which is the duration that you exercise, it could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever's appropriate for you, and the type of physical activity. And generally, when we talk about the type of physical activity, we're talking about aerobic activity, and we're talking about muscle strengthening activity. And I'm going to spend some time going through each one of those. So I think pictures will help us understand a lot when I start talking about types of exercise and types of exercise that can be done across the spectrum of disability. So walking indoors. A lot of times people connote exercise with walking, and in particular, walking on a treadmill. And so here we have a situation where we have individuals who probably have a low level of disability walking on a treadmill, and they're not holding on. Here we have a situation where this individual walks with a rollator. And as a consequence of that, you can see that they're on a treadmill with very good arm support, so they have something to hold on to while they're walking on a treadmill. And this is a picture from my lab when I was at Urbana-Champaign, where we had a treadmill that had a harness over the top of it. And this was specifically designed for individuals who are using a wheelchair and have a hard time supporting themselves while on a treadmill. And most good physical therapy clinics will have a harness system like this so that individuals with MS who are wheelchair users can still engage in walking as a form of exercise. We could think about walking outdoor. Here we have two individuals who just look like they're walking in an everyday neighborhood. Here we have a situation where we have an individual who's walking with a cane, and they have a person with them for added support. Here we have two individuals who are walking with poles, and this is sometimes called Nordic walking nowadays. And it's a great way to exercise because with two poles, you have much more stability and you have more points of contact to keep you safe while you're moving. And here's an individual who's walking in a fairly unstable environment, i.e. a trail, and they're walking with a rollator. Okay, so again, we have the spectrum of disability and exercise behavior. Cycling. So cycling is a form of exercise that I think all individuals with MS can engage in, regardless of the level of disability. So here we have an individual who's using a nice bike ergometer that both has a pedal and an arm system. And what you'll notice here is there's actually a fan. And what that fan does is it blows air on them continuously while they're cycling to keep them cool. Then we can move to recumbent cycling. So this would be a cycle for someone who might have more struggles in upright, where maybe they're using a walker or two canes. And this would be a form of cycling exercise. And this is, again, a picture from our research laboratory looking at a very specific type of cycling exercise. It's called functional electrically stimulated cycling. And it's for individuals who have a hard time controlling their legs while cycling. And what it does is we put electrodes on people's legs above the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the glutes, and the calf muscles, and it stimulates them in such a way that it mimics activation of the muscles to induce pedaling. And so again, we have a form of exercise for individuals who might have more advanced disease. Stepper. Okay, so probably not a lot of people going to the gym and doing the upright stepper machine. Okay, But the beauty is that many companies nowadays have created these recumbent arm leg steppers. And these devices are great because everybody across the entire spectrum of multiple sclerosis, no matter how severe it's affecting them, can get on a device like this and utilize it for a very potent exercise training stimulus. And it's because if you have weakness in your legs, you can more focus on your arms. If you have full function of your arm and your legs, you can use both very prominently. And if you really don't have any function of your legs, you can use your arms to move this back and forth. Swimming. We could have someone engage in just swimming laps. We have water aerobics. And believe it or not, this is an original picture of individuals with MS engaging in water-based exercise. I know it's hard to believe, but what you need to see is there are wheelchairs, and all of these individuals are doing some form of swimming while they're in a pool, whether it's floating and just kind of moving around slowly and methodically in the water, or trying to be more vigorous in their movements. So swimming could be a good example. Then we can move to strength training in a gymnasium. So we have a situation, this looks like a very standard gymnasium, and so for people who don't have really any functional deficits, this could be a very powerful environment for doing strength training. Here you can see individuals who are doing resistance training while they're in a wheelchair, in a wheeled device. And again, all of the equipment in here is made so that you could roll a wheelchair right up onto it to be able to do different resistance training stimuli. And lastly, home-based strength training. You don't have to go to a gymnasium to do strength training. You can do it at home. I went on the internet and just found this really nice home-based exercise program that doesn't require any special equipment. And this actually meets the requirements of the guidelines for exercise in MS. We have individuals doing body weight squats. There's no chair behind them, but they could put a chair behind them and do sit to stands from a chair. They could put a chair in front of them and utilize that for stability. Here we have them doing dumbbell rows, and that's a pitcher of water or a milk jug, something that's very easy to come by. You can fill it up with varying degrees of water for more and more resistance. Push-ups. This is a traditional push-up, but it could be a push-up on the knees. It could be a push-up against an inclined surface to make it easier. There's a lot of variability. A plank. It can be a full plank or a plank again on the knees for a core. Walking exercises like a lunge, as well as jumping jacks for those individuals who are obviously more or less functionally limited. Here's a wheelchair exercise resistance training program. Okay, and so here we have a situation where an individual is doing arm extensions to work the chest or pectoralis muscles. They're doing arm side raises to work the shoulder muscles, chest squeezes, again, to work the pecs. And you can see that there are a variety of different exercises. And what I'm trying to point out here is that when we talk about exercise, I want each and every one of you to see that we can engage in exercise for MS across the entire disability spectrum. And that's important when we start to think about the benefits of engaging in exercise. So, the study of and application of exercise in people with MS is not new. A lot of times I go to meetings and people think we just invented this like 5-10 years ago. This is something that goes all the way back to 1838 and some of the earliest cases of multiple sclerosis, where the physician John Abercrombie was using exercise to treat patients with multiple sclerosis. So this isn't new. This is almost 200 years old. The first study on exercise in people with multiple sclerosis was done by this gentleman right here, Randy Shapiro, who's a neurologist and a very famous neurologist in the field of multiple sclerosis. And he demonstrated that aerobic exercise in particular, regardless of how much individuals were affected by multiple sclerosis, was beneficial. And this was the first study ever done, and it was published in 1989. So again, not anything new. This is the landmark study of exercise in MS, and it was done by Jack Pettichan, who again is a prominent neurologist who contributed greatly to the field of multiple sclerosis. And he was actually funded by the government to do the first trial on exercise in people with multiple sclerosis, and it was designed to make sure that exercise was safe, that there weren't deleterious effects. What they found in this study is not only was exercise safe, but it actually had broad implications for improving disability, not worsening disability, but people's disability actually was reduced, or people became more functional, their fitness level became better, their symptoms became better, their quality of life became substantially better. So since that time, I want you guys to understand there are almost 500 clinical trials of exercise in multiple sclerosis. Raise your hand if you thought there would be 500 clinical trials on exercise training in people with MS. I'm glad you guys are as shocked as I am. There is a lot going on. And so Stuart told me I could spend the next 3 hours reviewing each and every one of these studies. Actually, he told me you better be done by 12:10. So I decided to kind of just summarize all the evidence for you. So what this slide does is it summarizes all the evidence for different benefits of exercise training. And what I want you to see, if you can see, I'm sorry that this is small, is that some of the arrows are more prominent than other arrows. And the darker the arrow, like this one right here, the stronger the evidence and the stronger the effect. The lighter the arrow, the smaller the body of evidence and the smaller the effect. Okay? So pretty simple. When we look at fitness, fatigue, and depressed mood, we see that there is a large body of evidence demonstrating that exercise improves aerobic power and muscle strength. It reduces fatigue, particularly in highly fatigued individuals. And it improves mood in individuals who have some degree of mood disorder. Okay, those are great benefits if you ask me, because fatigue is one of the most common symptoms in MS, isn't it? And many people with MS have some degree of depressed mood, and we can show that exercise is beneficial for both of those symptoms. It improves lower body mobility. It improves quality of life. So we've been talking and contextualizing exercise within the context of mobility, and we can actually improve your mobility through the utilization of exercise. There's some evidence on this other side over here, although this is weaker evidence and smaller number of studies, that exercise can improve cognition or things like processing speed. When you go to the doctor and they give you that test and they give you the number 2 and they ask you to remember it, and then they give you 5 and you have to add it to 2 and say 7, and then they give you the number 4 and you have to add that to 5 and say 9, and you start to lose your mind. That's one of the common tests. We try not to do that any longer. We've replaced it with better, but it improves the ability to do cognitive tests like that. It improves upper body mobility and utilization, which is important for doing what you guys are all doing right now, which is making me hungry. You're eating lunch, right? We need to be able to have upright or upper body mobility to be able to do things. It reduces anxiety. It reduces pain. And it improves participation, allowing you to go engage in activities like this where you're interacting with one another and having full participation in life. A couple of other things that I want to add is that exercise training reduces the rate of relapses in multiple sclerosis. And it reduces the rate of relapses by about 25%. And while that might not seem like a lot to you, the early disease-modifying therapies only reduce relapses by 25%. So exercise was as good. It reduces comorbidity, things like cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes. It's important because those comorbidities accelerate the rate that the disease progresses. And exercise can reverse these things and ultimately, we hope, slow the rate of disease progression. It improves the structure and integrity of the central nervous system, the brain. I think Augusto is going to talk a lot about brain health today. It also changes around biomarkers of neural degeneration, such as serum neurofilament light, which is a biomarker of axons and the skeleton of axons being broken down. And so what I'm trying to get you to think about is there might even be the potential for exercise having disease-modifying effects in MS. Now, don't take that as stop taking your disease-modifying therapies. That's not the message. The message is exercise is a great add-on to your current medical therapies. And if you have any questions about DMTs, ask Dr. MIRAVALLE. I'm not qualified. So safety. If exercise is beneficial for all people with MS, is it safe for all people with MS? And I'm going to kind of talk about two different prominent papers. This is an older paper that was published back in about 2010. And this is a newer paper that was just published in 2025 on an update of safety information. And what we found very early on is that there were very few adverse events with exercise. So when we did see adverse events with exercise, what they were things like low back pain, which occurs in multiple places. And low back pain happened with only one type of exercise, and that was resistance training. And that's completely preventable because if you do resistance training with the right oversight and with people helping you to do it correctly, we can completely avoid low back pain as a problem with resistance training. So these initial data suggested that overall exercise was safe in people with MS. The subsequent paper did a much more sophisticated approach to understanding adverse events and serious adverse events in people with MS. And what I want to focus on is the serious adverse events. Serious adverse events are things where you engaged in some sort of treatment and it resulted in you needing to seek medical attention, help, and care. Okay? Think about hospitalizations. Think about very serious, severe things. And what the data suggests are that exercise training compared to not engaging in exercise training really has no increase in the rate of serious adverse events in people with multiple sclerosis. So overall, the safety profile of engaging in exercise in people with multiple sclerosis across the spectrum of disability is safe, and it's not something that we should avoid out of safety concerns. Now, the prescription. The prescription becomes really important because if exercise is beneficial and exercise is safe, you need to know what to do to get the benefits safely, right? So fortunately, I was involved in this effort with Amy Latimer-Chung and Kathleen Martin-Guinness, where we created the first exercise guidelines for people with multiple sclerosis. And you can find these guidelines just by going to that magical thing called Google and typing in, bear with me, Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines for MS. Okay? Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines for MS. Why are they called Canadian? They were actually developed through funding from the MS Society of Canada. And they wanted them branded as the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines so that there was some credit and ownership. These guidelines are not just for Canadians, as you guys are smart and enough to know. They're for everybody with MS. Surprisingly, I'll just tell you a quick side story. We asked people when I was down at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, about these guidelines, and we gave them the original guidelines that said Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines for MS. And out of the 40 people we asked about the guidelines and their perception of the guidelines and how to put them into use, the first question we got from people is, why did you give me the Canadian ones? And we had to be very clear, these are not just for Canadians. These are for everybody with MS. So these guidelines tell you exactly what to do for both aerobic and strength training exercise. And they're very specific that people with MS should do both aerobic and muscle strengthening exercise. Don't prioritize one over the other. You need to do both. And these are to be done aerobic 2 times per week and resistance 2 times per week. I think that's a very simple bar. 2 days per week. They can be done on the same day. You don't have to do them on separate days. You can do your aerobic exercise and then do your resistance exercise right afterwards, or the other way around. The only thing that we ask is you have 1 day of rest in between muscle strengthening exercise. Okay? 1 day of rest to allow your muscles to regenerate their strength. So 2 days per week of aerobic, 2 days per week of resistance. You can do them on the same day. Just make sure you have 1 day of rest. And that's evidence-based. That is exactly what the data tell us. How much? We want you to start out with aerobic exercise with as little as 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be jumping straight to 30 minutes. Start small. Start with 5 minutes of whatever type of aerobic exercise you choose to do. Build it over time, up to 30 minutes. You can take 2 years to build it up to 30 minutes. You could take 2 months. You have to build it on your body's message back to you. Your body will tell you if you're building it too quickly or not, okay? Resistance exercise, how much? We want people to start with just 5 exercises. That's what the evidence suggested. 2 for your upper body, 1 for your core, and 2 for your lower body. And just do 1 set of exercises. So one set of exercise that's like 10 to 12 movements of that exercise. And that's it. And then build over time to up to 10 exercises and doing 2 sets of each one. Okay? Again, build slowly. Don't build too fast. Listen to your body. How hard? You know, we said moderate intensity, or when you do resistance exercise, you get to the point where you're struggling on the last set. You know, my personal belief is I don't care about the intensity. I more care that you're out there doing it and getting up to 30 minutes and doing the appropriate number of repetitions. Do it, you know, to an intensity that you can manage and that you can handle. And then there are lots of different options, and I gave you all the options in the world with my first set of slides, okay? We have changed the guidelines a little bit, just so you know. This was an update. And now the guidelines are, we want you to get to 2 to 3 days per week. That's what the evidence is suggesting. If you get up to 3 days a week, you get even better benefits. But 2 days is still the minimum. We created an advanced aerobic exercise guideline. And a large part of that was I started giving talks on the guidelines for exercise in MS. And I would have people come up to me after the talk and say, Rob, you know, I walk 4 or 5 days per week, and I'm going out there for an hour. And these are people who are very committed to the routine. Should I cut back? No, but your guidelines say only do this. I said, no, don't cut back. And so we realized we needed to take another look at the literature and create advanced guidelines for people who are really regular exercisers wanting to push the envelope. And in this case, it's only for aerobic, and we're suggesting 5 days per week, and it could get pretty intense for these individuals. And the general resistance is still 3 days per week. A few years ago, we decided to create a whole nother set of guidelines. And why this is important is because these guidelines, as you can read, are throughout the disease course, okay? And that's important because the guidelines say that that prescription that I showed you from the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines applies to everybody, no matter their degree of disability. So that guideline applies to everybody. The other thing that we added into this is this notion of living a physically active lifestyle. So trying to get physical activity as part of daily life. Now, what does that mean? That can mean many different things. So that can mean, and I'm not advocating this for everybody, it's just an example. I pull into my building. I'm in the building for kinesiology, which is the study of human movement, and we have physical therapy in our building. Here's a set of elevators. Here's a set of stairs. All of our students take the elevators. Rob takes the stairs, okay? I'm not advocating that everybody with MS can do that. But it's looking for opportunities in life where you can engage in physical activity as a little bit of effort and exertion to movement to get health benefits. Okay. As an example, this is actual story from people with MS. We run lifestyle physical activity programs for people with MS. And people will tell us, yeah, when I go grocery shopping, before I even start grocery shopping, I walk a lap around the outside of all the aisles in the store. And then I grocery shop. Okay. You know, that's a real example of another example, I watch TV. We all like to watch a little bit of TV, right? Streaming is streaming because streaming is hugely successful of videos and stuff. I'm too poor to pay for high quality streaming, so I have lots of commercials. Every commercial, stand up, take a lap around your house. That's just getting physical activity as part of your life. And it has real benefits for people with MS as well. And that's what was advocated here. So before Stuart yanks me off, what I want to convince you of, and I hope that you understand this, all people with MS, everybody with MS can benefit from exercise training. It's important that we recognize that. Now, how might you go about starting an exercise program? I would advocate that you start with your healthcare provider, particularly your neurologist. Someone like Dr. MIRAVALLE or other excellent neurologists in Chicagoland area, the Windy City, Stuart, would be an excellent place to start. They've listened to me talk to them for over 25 years, okay? They know a little bit about exercise. But what we've learned is that the promotion of exercise really should occur through your healthcare provider. They are really knowledgeable about you, about your MS and how it's affecting you, and how you could utilize exercise to benefit you specifically. And in particular, your neurologist is the agent of exercise rehabilitation in MS. And so we're training our neurologists and our providers better so that when they have this interaction with you, they can help you prepare to engage in exercise. So ultimately, you can begin the process of becoming an exerciser and moving along this spectrum of becoming a regular exerciser and experiencing the many benefits of this important health behavior. So Stuart, I believe I'm done on time at 12:05. And I'd be happy to take questions.
You had until 12:10. Let's congratulate Professor Motl for his fine talk.
I actually didn't make a connection with the speaker, but do you lead U of I exercise programs?
Yes, ma'am. So I'm a professor.
I did one of your studies down at you were at Champaign-Urbana at the time. I couldn't come all the time, so I didn't do the exercise training. I was one of those people that do 3 times, so you do, test it against. But I know the numbers. I like math, so I like that number test.
Well,
But I don't have a question. I was just wondering if you were in charge. I was like, this is excellent.
Well, in charge is a very loaded term. So my graduate students and colleagues would tell me or you that I'm not in charge and they're in charge of me. But yeah, we were in Urbana-Champaign. We started research on exercise and MS in Urbana-Champaign in 2002 and moved up to Chicagoland more recently. And we have a similar program here now. And I still facilitate research down in Urbana-Champaign. So thank you for participating in our studies. We appreciate it.
I noticed that when I first had MS that I would exercise and, I enjoy exercise, like going bike riding and different things. But didn't you notice that on your study that once they do the exercise, you're kind of down for the day. You only have so much stuff that you can do. And I noticed that on days I exercise, I couldn't do anything else, like go grocery shopping and do my other things I need to,
Yeah.
cleaning up the house. It's like one thing, one and done. So did you notice on your studies that people, when they exercised, that they had those issues?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it is a little bit of a problem that we have had to confront. That is, if someone who has MS engages in exercise, sometimes they utilize all their energy and the rest of the day is shot. And I think that's what you're articulating. And so there are a number of things to think about within that. Maybe it's important to not exercise every day and prioritize exercise on 2 or 3 days of the week so that you have other days that you're not wiped out, that you still have the capacity to do other things. Maybe breaking the exercise into 2 sessions during the day, like doing a small amount in the morning and then a smaller amount later on, because 2 sessions of 10 or 15 minutes sum together to be 30 minutes, like if they're 15 each, obviously. And that meets the guidelines and yields the same benefits as just doing 30 all at once. And so what I'm suggesting is restructuring the exercise as to breaking it up into smaller bouts and chunks that aren't so energy depleting. And trying to do exercise on days that you might not have a lot of other things going on those days, or that you might have things that you can do that don't require a lot of physical exertion and movement, so you can avoid kind of that post-exertional malaise type experience that you might be achieving. Switch up the types of exercise. So one of the things that we know is that if you have a lot of muscle weakness, doing aerobic exercise like riding a bike can be very fatiguing. So instead of focusing on the aerobic only, do some strengthening exercise as well to get your muscles stronger so that the aerobic exercise is not as demanding. And generally speaking, resistance exercise won't be quite as fatiguing for you. Does that make sense? So trying to get you to play around with the parameters a little bit so that you don't end up, because that's counterproductive. If you end up overly fatigued, you're less likely to do exercise in the future.
I noticed there wasn't a correlation of if I did so many miles a day that it would build up. It seems like one day it was better and one day it was worse and one day it was better.
And that's also part of MS, right? MS is a very, variable disease. Fatigue in particular, it can be so multifaceted. And the reason that it's brought on, it could be exercise, it could be other things. And so if you have a day where your fatigue is really bad, maybe that's a day to skip exercise and focus on replenishing your energy, and then do exercise another day when you have more energy. The last thing I want someone to do is to engage in exercise and get so exhausted and fatigued that they can't do other things, because then you'll never exercise again. You'll stop. It just is counterproductive. So we need to figure out how to put exercise into your life in a way that's non-counterproductive. And it ends up being only 1 day a week that you can exercise because of the side effects. I'm okay with that, because 1 day to me is better than 0. Something is always better than nothing, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Over here.
You may have already answered it because you just said something is better than nothing. And I like to use hand weights. And I noticed that over time, like depending on how many reps and sets I'm doing, my form becomes sloppy. And it's no longer like ideal in the slightest. But I tell myself like something in a sense is better than nothing, or no, like it's better to lift weights the wrong way opposed to not lifting them at all.
So that happens to everybody who does resistance training, right? As you do more and more repetitions, your muscles get tired and your form starts to get a little sloppy, and you start to throw other movements into it. You're not alone because you have MS that happens. That happens to everybody. I was at the gym this morning and noticing that I was getting sloppy in what I was doing, right? The second I start getting sloppy, I stop. Because the second you get sloppy is the second you put yourself at risk of potential injury. And so one of the things that I would suggest that you do is if you're trying to do one set of 12 and you get to 8 and you start getting sloppy, try to do 2 sets of 8 instead of one big set of 12, so that you give your body that capacity in your muscle to regenerate before you start working it again. But certainly if you see your form breaking down, stop, because that's where injury happens. And that's why we see injury in resistance training, is because people push too hard, they get sloppy, and they hurt themselves. And again, I think the principle of there are some days I go to the gym and I'm just kind of like doing a lot lighter weight than I normally feel like I would do. And that's still a day of exercising that's good for my health and good for my well-being, if that makes sense. So it's okay sometimes to diminish it, but still get it done, the intensity of it, and still get it done, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. Next one is over here.
I had a question about foot drop, and because I walk every day, but then if I walk a certain amount of steps, that's when I tend to experience my foot drop. Is there anything that I can do, like with braces or anything like that, or exercises to stretch out my muscles?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there certainly are devices that can help with foot drop, whether that's bracing or some of these other devices that activate the tibialis muscle to pull the toe up at a certain point of time in the gait structure. There are other things that you can do, though. Stretching is a great one. To kind of change the range of motion, but you can also do simple exercises where you are pulling your foot up to strengthen the tibialis muscle so that you have more strength there. And that's something you're doing it right now, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's one of those things. We do something at the University of Illinois, Chicago. It's called GH therapy. And GH therapy is a form of muscle therapy that we've primarily been doing in individuals who have chronic kidney disease, because they have so much weakness and detraining and muscle wasting, and it impacts their ability to ambulate and walk well. And surprisingly, one of the exercises that is super effective in these individuals for improving their strength and their control is just doing a simple pulling their foot up and holding it there using the muscle in the shin right here, what's called the tibialis. And it's something that most people who do resistance training will never do in their life, but for functional purposes of walking, it's critically important.
Many times in physical therapy, the therapist focuses on the weak areas, like the legs. Even the legs are very weak, but it looks like there's plenty benefit to exercise regardless of which part of the body is involved. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to exercise even muscles that are stronger, that are more intact, because you want to, at the very least, maintain strength in those other regions. The reason that physical therapists are focusing on weak muscles is because they're trying to restore the function of the individual. They're not thinking about, per se, bettering in a larger way. So it's important that we address weakness, but it's also important that we make sure that we're maintaining the strength and functionality of other muscle groups.
Great, thank you. The next one is saying about being diagnosed years ago and at a specific age right now, but she started walking with a friend and she hasn't found how to get more motivated and enthusiastic about exercise. What can you tell her?
So I kind of didn't catch much of that, Stuart. Just to be honest, you went so fast. So it sounds like this person is looking for motivation and encouragement for exercising. I think the first place I would go is to my neurologist, and I would talk to my neurologist about what I might do exercise-wise to restore some of the different issues I'm having. I think one of the biggest motivators for exercise is to understand that if you have some sort of problem and exercise can be effective in helping you manage it, that as you start to engage in exercise and you start to see the benefits, it will reinforce your behavior itself, because things that we see improving us are things that we'll tend to do again. finding support from other individuals. Like, I always wonder why support groups don't have an exercise component to them. And I think it's something that all support groups could do, because you have a support structure right there that can encourage you and reward you and be positive towards your exercise behavior. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, and there is a person, though, that does what you're talking about as far as support group goes, and her name is Gretchen Hawley. All right, and Gretchen is a doctor of physical therapy, and she does online classes all the time for people who want to do exercise. Okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that's for the MS community only. All right, next person is asking if house cleaning, vacuuming, running around, cleaning up should be considered a form of exercise.
I wouldn't call it a form of exercise. I'd call it a form of physical activity. It's moving your body, burning energy, and that meets the definition of physical activity. It just turns out that it's kind of chore-based physical activity, but certainly, like vacuuming, cleaning, mopping, sweeping, all of those things, mowing the yard. I'm probably the only person in my neighborhood who has a push lawnmower or not a service. That's part of physical activity as well. Chores, household, anything that you can do that you're moving and expending energy meets the definition of physical activity.
Person wants to know, they're in their mid-60s, sounds like me, and have not been using steps in quite some time. Want to know what is too many steps to take at first so not to get too sore and not want to do it the next day.
Great. So there are some people in this room who've recently finished a big exercise training study that we did in individuals 55 years of age and older with multiple sclerosis. And what we did for walking-based purposes is we started people out at walking 2 times per week for 10 minutes and trying to accumulate somewhere between 500 and 1,000 steps if they could during that period of time. And the reason we started there is because it's a smaller dose of exercise. It's something that we felt that even people who were not regular exercisers, which is what we enrolled in the study, could do. And it turns out that they could do it. And as they got used to that, then we were able to increase them on a weekly basis up to approximately 30 minutes and 3,000 steps 2 to 3 times per week.
Great, thank you. MS workouts, also specific exercises for foot drop, hip flexors, and more. What exercises do you have? What workouts do you have for people with foot drop, hip flexors, and more? Sitting and standing options?
So we talked a little bit about foot drop earlier, and in particularly activating your tibialis muscle, which is the muscle kind of in the front of your shin, by moving your foot and pulling it towards your knee. For your hip flexors, one of the things that you can do is just simply raising your legs straight up, because that's activating that hip flexor muscle, and putting it down. It's almost like doing a marching type movement and making sure that you lift your leg all the way up. And the hip flexor, as you guys know, is very important for your ability to walk and ambulate. So that would be 2 examples. And over time, you can begin to, if you have access, put ankle weights on when you're doing hip flexor movements so that you get some resistance to that movement as well. But when you first start, I would recommend just doing it without weights, because it's not, for most of us, a very strong muscle, because most people never work it out in their lives.
Are the benefits for multiple sclerosis purely linked to physical movement, or do people have to be mindful of their movements? Meaning, would we still get the same benefits exercising while watching TV or listening to music, or do we need to focus solely on what we're doing and allow our brains to make connections?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So I have lots of different feelings on that question. If the only way you're going to go out and exercise is by listening to music or by watching TV or doing those sorts of things, then I'm 100% going to tell you exercise, listening to music, watching TV, streaming your favorite show, and do that. We have very recent data that we're submitting that shows that when people are exercising just in the free world, like so walking around on a track or outdoors versus walking on a treadmill, their brain immediately afterwards is activated in a very different way. Okay. And so what we want is for you to exercise without external stimuli such as music or streaming, and really paying attention to what you're doing when you're walking around outside on a track, as an example, to optimize the brain activation, to optimize the benefits of neuroplasticity. Because when you're watching a TV or you're listening to music, you're not focusing in on the movements, and the brain is not activating in the ideal way to adapt.
How can you determine the difference between pushing your way through an exercise versus pushing when you really should be stopping?
That's a very good question. And I think it's really rooted in the notion of paying attention to your body and yourself. If you're doing a bout of exercise and you're feeling like it's getting overly effortful, it's getting overly grueling, I think you clearly have pushed too far, and you need to stop and back off. Your body, as you become more and more accustomed to it, which is one of the most amazing things about people with MS. Y'all are so, and I can say y'all because I lived in Alabama for a while, and I went to school in Georgia for a while, are very attuned to your bodies. You know when something's not right in your bodies. That's one of the most amazing things about people with MS. And you know when something's not right, you go talk to your neurologist quick, because you know something might be going on that's not so good. The same thing happens during exercise. If you're exercising and you're feeling like, oh, maybe I need to back off, maybe I need to stop, maybe this is too much, listen to your body. That's the primary rule. Everybody should do that, but people with MS have a unique skill to be able to do that very, very well, in my opinion.
Okay, question out here.
Yes, hi. My name is Maria. I'm curious, have you done any studies with people who have been sedentary for a period of time, like maybe 2 years or so, and but they still have some mobility. They can still walk, they can still do a little bit, but for the most part, say 90% of the time, they're sedentary. Type of studies have you done, and what would be some tips?
That is a great question. Every research study that we do, we actually enroll people who are not engaged in any exercise program and engage in the equivalent of less than 5 minutes of planned, purposeful physical activity on a daily basis. So they would meet your definition of people who are sedentary, sitting a lot, and inactive, not doing a lot. And we do that because those are the people who represent those who we think we need to change their behavior the most so we can get the biggest bang out of. So literally 90% of the research that's been done in MS has started with those individuals. Okay? What would be really interesting to know is in people who have been doing this for a long period of time, like what might be the additional benefits of engaging in exercise and physical activity behavior over and beyond what they're currently doing. So it's a great question, but all the research applies to that very specific person you just described. Thank you.
Great. Next one's out here.
Hello, this is actually kind of a nice follow-up with that. Speaking of someone who's non-ambulatory and, can also be triggered with nerve pain when they do movements, it gets very hard to motivate because everything you do comes at a cost, maybe even not till you go to bed that night. But my question is for somebody in that condition where everything is pushing yourself or you're super spastic and you're limited, is there research showing whether active or passive exercise, if you need to have both, or if the passive is enough to actually have growth in your strength as the whole use it or lose it motto becomes very crucial at that stage? I was just curious if there's been any research specifically on do you need both throughout?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it's such an important question. Unfortunately, there's not the science on that very specific question. But from the guidelines paper that we wrote talking about individuals who are in that situation, we advocate passive movement is critically important to maintain the range of motion for someone. If you lose the range of motion, then you're not going to get it back, right? And we want to maintain range of motion as much as we can. And range of motion is critically important for when someone tries to do active movements as well. So after we establish good ranges of motion, then we try to add in the activation. It doesn't have to be activation against like added resistance. Just volitionally moving the arm is sufficient when we're at that stage of MS. So I think you know the right prescription. And I think you also know the rule of listen to your body from everything you've described, because you're absolutely right. Particularly at later stages of MS, if you do too much, you can pay for it considerably the next day, right? With pain and so I think you know the program. I love it.
Thank you. Last questions right here.
I was wondering if there are any supplements that you recommend or like with the working out, because I take a lot of supplements with working out, but like creatine for the muscles, and there's also just protein powders and just anything else that would assist.
Yeah, I think that supplements with resistance training in particular are really beneficial. Is there scientific evidence on it in people with MS? I'm going to tell you no. Okay. But I think we know in general that supplementation is beneficial, particularly for resistance training and strength and muscle related gains. I think protein after you get done working out to help the muscle regenerate skeletal muscle proteins and synthesize them so the muscle can be strengthened and repaired is critical, regardless of whether you have MS or any disease. And that comes from great science out of a lot of different research labs. Creatine is helpful, all of those things. The thing I would encourage you to do, if you're going to add supplementation, talk to your neurologist so that they know exactly what you're planning on doing, exactly what you are doing, and whether or not there might be any contraindications relative to medications that you're taking or anything else that they know about you medically. So make sure you discuss that with your neurologist. And I think Dr. MIRAVALLE would second that for sure.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who had questions. Again, we want to thank Sanofi for being our sponsor of this program series on understanding disability progression in multiple sclerosis. I want to thank our exhibitors that were here today. We had A&I, we had Professor Motl's group. Keep calling a doctor, but I think he wants to be known more as a professor. Genentech and Novartis. And so again, thank you everybody for being here and safe driving home.